What's up, guys? All good? We're back with another review on the channel, and today we're going to check out the story of a gamer who couldn't finish a game because it was too hard, and ended up getting a second chance. But now, if he dies in the game, he dies in real life. But before anything, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Alright, no more stalling. Let's get into the video. Our story begins on a starry full moon night in a massive castle with someone saying, "A mere human made it this far? I must admit, you're skilled, Electro Steel." This person speaking is introduced as Farza, a rank 7 demon lord. Then, we see our dear protagonist, Han Jae-woo, also known as Milky Steel, saying that Farza's era ends today. He takes a combat stance with his sword and uses the 12th form, Empirical Sword, leaping toward Farza when, epically, a notification pops up saying he's been disconnected from the server, while Farza calls him full of flaws. Our protag begs him to stop, but he gets disconnected right during a raid mission against the rank 7 Demon Lord, showing that warrior Han Jae-woo failed to complete it. Cut to a quick scene. Some dudes ask if Jae-woo, aka the protag, is still playing the game. Another guy says yeah, and wonders if they should wake him. One tells him to shake him gently, but suddenly he accidentally unplugs the cable. This is where our protag erupts in rage, grabs the guy by the collar, and demands to know if he unplugged the network cable. The guy apologizes, but Jae-woo throws him to the ground, yelling that he was practically at the end of the game, and locks in a rear naked choke on the guy. He tilted hard, bro. The protag tells us his name is Han Jae-woo, and says it may look like he's just a gaming addict, but he was actually pretty popular. The problem solver of Hanum, the brain of Hanum, the money goblin. He had a good life, but then realized how empty it all was. That's when he laid eyes for the first time on a game capsule. Then he talks about his obsession, the masterpiece from Super AI Aquila, a VR game of insane quality, savior of humanity. He says that world changed his life. A massive open-world single-player RPG. For someone who had never even read a picture book, that world was magical. Not to mention the gorgeous characters of every species. Their stories hooked him, and even changed him. Yes, he married an NPC. Someone who only cared about money took out a loan just to buy a 1 billion one-game capsule. That's roughly 3 million reais. Insane. He even tells people to call him crazy. Because he is. The guy apparently getting choked asks how Jae-woo could treat him like that, especially after he invested so much money in him just to have it thrown away. Jae-woo looks at him and says he gets it. Maybe he covered for them too much. A little fraud without the wife knowing, side gigs behind the company's back, or some dude pooping out VTubers for the last 10 years. Random guy number 2 asks Jae-woo who he thinks he is to talk like that after taking $1 billion just to play a game. Honestly, I'd take that deal too. When he touches Jae-woo and gets hit with a 1,000-yard stare, he goes silent. One of them asks how Jae-woo thinks he'll pay his debts by writing a game guide. We see that the more he plays, the poorer he gets. Then, the apparent loan shark suggests Jae-woo work with them again. After all, he was the problem solver of Hanum. Jae-woo refuses, because he still hasn't seen the true ending of the game, the one no one else has ever reached. He says reaching that true ending is the least he can do to thank the game for everything it's taught him. Jae-woo kicks them out, saying break time is over. Dude literally stiffed loan sharks. One of them even leaves asking about the interest payment. After locking the door, one of the sharks yells that he still believes in Jae-woo. Then he jumps back into savior of humanity. Now, in the Byron Cathedral, our Electro Steel, aka Protag, gets a 22-hour penalty for disconnecting mid-battle. He's pissed. Now he can't make any money. Then, a strange voice says he seems to be struggling. Jae-woo asks who's there, and suddenly a girl materializes in front of him, saying her name is Aquila, master of savior of humanity. He chuckles and asks if someone like her is really. Aquila makes a cute face and tells him not to judge a book by its cover. He thinks that's exactly his type. Then he asks if she really expects him to believe she's Aquila just because she popped out of nowhere. She snaps her fingers and apparently freezes time. Jaewoo thinks it must be an SSS rank ability. But Aquila, seemingly reading his mind, says it's not an ability. She just shut the server down a little. She asks if he believes her now. Anyway, she says she's planned a new event for the game's 7th anniversary, and asks if he wants to hear about it. When he asks what it is, she starts a countdown. At noon, a new world will open, and he has to beat the game in that world with a brand new character. He laughs and says she's nuts. He hasn't even beaten the game with his current character yet. Then she says the prize is 25 billion won. Now he's paying attention. She teases him, asking if he's scared. No way I'd let that slide. His eyes literally start burning with excitement. Aquila asks if he doesn't want to see the game's true ending. Maybe it really exists. She summons an item and says it holds clues to reaching that ending. As he reaches out, she tells him to wait. She says that if he agrees now, he gets a bonus and sends 30 million won to him instantly. He starts going crazy over how much money that is. Then she says, "Well, duh," and shows the leaderboard of who's spent the most money in the game. He's number 1, obviously. At this point, the protag doesn't even care if he finishes the new game or not. At least this month's interest payment is covered. So Jaewoo tells Aquila he'd be an idiot to turn down an event like this. He beats his chest and says he'll do it. Aquila says she knew he'd accept, just what she'd expect from a top-tier player. With that, she says she'll now transport him to the new world. Then she starts chanting in a bizarre language, and after a flurry of over-the-top special effects, she ends with the word installation. Then, she and the protagonist appear, apparently, on a tiny planet in space, with a door behind them. Aquila tells the protagonist that this door will lead him to the new world. The protagonist asks if that's the magic door, making a reference, apparently, to Doraemon. He asks Aquila if the game will start as soon as he walks through the door, and she says yes. Then, without further ado, he opens the door, which is shining with a golden light, points at Aquila's face, and tells her not to forget the reward money. He then says that he's finally headed toward the true ending. And since poor people can't have nice things, Aquila mentions that she forgot to say one little thing, a minor detail. If his character dies in this event, he'll die in real life too. At that point, it's already too late for our protagonist to back out. He falls like a sack of potatoes into a forest and wonders why it hurts, since it's supposed to be a game. He starts realizing that girl, Aquila, was really serious. Super pissed off for being tricked into entering the game, he tells her to go to hell, and says he's going to beat this damn game. And so, the former Electra of Steel begins a new gameplay. Let's go, squad. The manhwa shows a sort of profile card for Aquila. She's an AI who created the VR single-player game savior of humanity. She's considered a goddess within the game's universe and loves cute things. It's impossible to understand what she's thinking. It also shows a card explaining what kind of game the protagonist is in. It's an adventure game where players face demon lords trying to bring down the empire. Beloved worldwide for being a perfect VR game, no one has ever reached the happy ending because of its difficulty. The biggest debate among fans is who will be the first to reach that happy ending. Hours later, it seems time hasn't been kind to our protagonist. Super pissed at Aquila, he says he's never going to forgive her for this. Weren't you the big shot? Then he opens his status window, and, obviously, he has the dehydrated debuff. He complains that she just had to give him a trash character with only 20 max HP and, to make it worse, only 3 mana points. He says he's only walked for 12 hours, only 12, and is already dehydrated. He wants to know how the hell he's supposed to get the happy ending with this character. Then he hears the sound of dripping water and starts laughing like a maniac for having randomly found the book How to Survive by Bear Grylls. Yes, they really went there. He tells Aquila to go screw herself. This manhwa is overflowing with words YouTube doesn't allow. When our protagonist faceplants into the river water, he finds a beautiful brown-haired woman bathing her goodies completely naked and starts choking on all the water he was drinking. Okay, now things are getting interesting. He literally loses 1 HP for having a massive tea. He says, "Dear God," and wonders who that snack is. Then, when he tries to peek at the pair of melons, the game blocks him with a message saying he has to pay for the DLC. LOL, yes, that really happened. He yells at the game for making a VIP player pay for DLC. He complains, thinking he was playing the full version. Then he hears a whisper in his ear. "Hey kid, you have to pay to see what happens next." Then 4 women appear behind him. They're about to mess him up. He asks, "How much?" This guy is a total dog. Cut to the next scene. He's shown tied up to a chair, apparently with a witch telling him to stay still because he's a pervert. Fair. She says if he stays quiet, she might consider letting him keep his pants. Another guy who's also tied up asks if he's okay. They're both screwed. The protagonist, still wanting to see a snack, asks again how much it costs. The guy asks where the hell he's going with that question, and he says he's just messing around. Then the guy introduces himself as Rudd, a monster hunter. The protagonist calls himself Valorstead Valor in this world, and asks how Rudd ended up there. Rudd says it was just bad luck, that he ended up near the witch's forest while chasing prey. And you already know the rest. The protagonist says that's really bad luck. Rudd asks him the same question, but he just says it was a similar story. Dude literally spawned there, so he didn't have much choice. Rudd says he doesn't know what exactly the protagonist went through, but it's unfortunate since he looks so young. The protagonist says it's fine, because this kind of situation is his specialty. Then he spots a small knife on the ground and quietly grabs it without the witches noticing. Rudd asks if he has a plan. He tells us of course he does, because he was the one who wrote the guide on how to beat these witches. He says it took him 3 whole days. The guy's a maniac. Then he tells us they're the 5 witches of Havel. That title was given because they appear in Havel Forest. Their names are Gunda, Kaldura, Aldida, Fugal, and lastly Hajuju. Even though they're early game bosses players have to get through, thousands have lost to them. So they're pretty well known. But if you look closely, he says, they're a completely disorganized group. The protagonist makes a pervy face, like he's plotting something. Then he says that now that he thinks about it, Lady Fugal is still alive. The system notifies that he's provoking Fugal. He says he remembers that Lady Hajuju said she'd kill her. Fugal tells him to shut up, but by then, the protagonist is already inside her head. Fugal asks Hajuju, "Who is going to kill who?" And the system says the provocation worked. Then he tells us something about Fugal. She hates Hajuju. The protagonist adds that he's pretty sure he heard Hajuju say she'd off Fugal and take all her stuff afterward. Even Rudd, the dumbass, asks if he's serious. Then Fugal corners Hajuju. She sighs and says, "You really believe him?" The protagonist gulps, thinking he messed up. But then Hajuju has the brilliant idea to say that it's not like Fugal was going to use all the money she's hoarding anyway, so it's only fair that she gets some of it too. The protagonist also got into Hajuju's head. Fun fact about Hajuju, she wants Fugal's wealth. Then Aldida says that that's why Hajuju was making an acid bomb. Detail about Aldida, she can't read the room. Gunda doesn't care and just asks when lunch will be ready. Gunda's trait, She's always hungry. Caldura asks if they're going to fight, because if they are, she wants in. Obviously, she loves fighting. Then all of them start brawling with each other, and the protagonist starts laughing like a maniac because he successfully provoked all of them. He says the plan is going smoothly and comments that most people think the witches work as a team because of their shared title, but in truth, they can't cooperate at all. People keep fighting them without knowing this, and that's why thousands have failed. Taking advantage of the chaos, the protagonist tells Rudd it's time to make a run for it, and points to the exit. But before they escape, he tells Rudd to go on ahead. He still has something to do. While the witches are all in the middle of the fight, he grabs a chair and smashes it down on them, knocking all 5 into the boiling cauldron. 2 of them start taking damage, and the protagonist takes off, saying they may be dumb, but they give great XP. Just as he's about to escape, one of Fugel's snakes grabs his leg. Fugel says she's not dying alone and sends more snakes to attack him. The protagonist, who forgot that his character is extremely weak, is saved by Rudd, who comes back to help. Rudd asks if he's okay, and the protagonist says yes, then asks to borrow Rudd's bow. Rudd hands it to him and asks if he's any good with it. Trying not to brag, the protagonist says he's decent. He then shoots a vase sitting above the giant cauldron. Hijuja yells that this is really bad. That was the acid bomb she made for Fugel. The house explodes with all of them inside. The protagonist takes just 1 damage because a rock lands on his head. Rudd asks if they really finished them off. The protagonist nervously tells him not to say that, but the system confirms the achievement. These witches are nothing! It shows he defeated all 5 witches in one go and gained 323,000 XP and some change, plus 5,000 achievement points. Hopefully that's a crap ton of XP. The protagonist celebrates, saying he got incredibly lucky at such a low level. He mentions he only needs to get one more thing. Rudd says he thought they were going to die and tells the protagonist he saved his life. Then Rudd says, even if it's not much, he wants to give the protagonist something as thanks. He gives him the red dragon fruit. The protagonist is stunned. He had never gotten this item in his previous playthroughs. Rudd explains that it looked valuable, so he took it from the witch's nest. In a flash, the protagonist thanks Rudd, snatches the fruit from his hand, and eats it all. He then transforms into a dragon bone form with immense power. He basically goes Super Saiyan out of nowhere. He feels all his stats rising dramatically and comments that a regular player like him could never dream of this kind of early game luck. Rudd looks at him and asks if he might be interested in becoming a monster hunter. Incoming witch hunter protagonist. With that, the protagonist unlocks a relationship route with the monster hunter. At the end of every chapter, there seems to be trivia about the game world. This time, it's about the Guardian class. They appear in battles against the Legion of Darkness, which supports the Demon Lords. If all Guardians disappear, the Legion will rise and bring total destruction. Back to Rudd, who just invited the protagonist to become a monster hunter. The protagonist politely declines, saying he has things to do. Rudd notes he must be a busy man. But then the protagonist remembers something. He doesn't have a class, so all the XP he gained has nowhere to go. It would disappear in a month. So, he quickly changes his mind and, as Rudd starts walking off, the protagonist says, 3 months. That's how long he'll stay with Rudd as a hunter. Rudd jokingly asks why not 3 years. Slow down there, buddy. Rudd tells the protagonist to go hide in the forest wherever he wants. He'll start tracking him in 30 minutes. The protagonist realizes that Rudd has a monster tracking skill from the hunter skill tree. He notes Rudd's strong, but underestimated him. The protagonist had explored this forest countless times and remembers everything, especially the good stuff. He explains how the dense trees confuse your sense of direction, toxic spores from mushrooms fill the air, and dangerous beasts roam even worse than the witches. All of this is already etched into his brain. Also, thanks to the red dragon fruit, his physical stats are nearly maxed, so it should be basically impossible for Rudd to find him so easily. Or is it? Rudd finds him almost instantly. He gives the hiding spot a score of 50, and 10 more points for enthusiasm. The protagonist, spooked, asks how he did it. Rudd says his face screams curiosity. He adds that it's been a while since he's had such a fun student, and tells the protagonist to do his best. With that, a quest is completed. Hunter's Initiation. And a new one begins. The Hunter's Trials. Completing this quest will unlock the Monster Hunter class. With it, he gains Herbalism, Intermediate Swordsmanship, Survival, Musket Shooting. The protagonist smirks with a devilish face, and says they'll work very well together. 3 months later, Rudd asks if he really finished all the tasks. The protagonist says it seems Rudd doesn't believe him, and tells him to go hide somewhere. Rudd says he admires the protagonist's spirit, and will give it a shot, but if he doesn't find him in an hour, the protagonist has to cook dinner. The protagonist agrees with a psychotic grin. Rudd climbs a freaking cliff, and says he's truly happy to have found such a good apprentice at the end of his life. He adds that maybe he shouldn't make things so hard, since hiding near a cliff means there's no way the protagonist could find him within an hour. Meanwhile, the protagonist is climbing the cliff like a ghost, right behind him. So he grabs Rudd's foot, and says he caught him. Every time they played hide-and-seek after that, the protagonist always found Rudd. Rudd says he's trying to understand how the protagonist mastered a skill in 3 months, when it took him 5 years to learn it. In a last desperate attempt to hide, Rudd hides inside a hellhound's nest, and says there's no way the protagonist would go there. But as soon as he turns his back to the beast, the protagonist taps his shoulder and says, "Guardian tip number 1, not even earthquakes wake a sleeping hellhound." The protagonist then asks if he passed the test, and Rudd, visibly disappointed, says yes. Outside the nest, Rudd comments that he never thought the protagonist would master those skills in just 3 months. The protagonist says it was all thanks to his master, but Rudd insists it's because he's just that talented. Pretending to be grateful that Rudd taught him everything, the protagonist reveals he used all the points he earned from defeating the witches. Rudd says he's truly incredible for remembering every bit of monster ecology he explained, like even knowing about the hellhound. The protagonist then tells us it was obvious. After all, he was the actual author of Monster Ecology. Rudd says he's never met anyone like him before, and that at this rate, the protagonist is definitely going places. Then he asks what the protagonist plans to do next, if it's that thing he mentioned before. The protagonist replies that first, he's going to earn some money, since everything starts with money. Rudd agrees, and says that he actually has a close friend who works as a mercenary, suggesting the protagonist try it out. Rudd's such a good guy, seriously. The protagonist finds the idea intriguing. Being a mercenary is the perfect job for earning early game cash, especially since it's flexible and unpaid upfront. He adds that if he's lucky, he might even run into the game's guardians. So the protagonist tells Rudd he's going to become a mercenary, and grabs his hand all excited. Rudd gives him his old mercenary insignia, which would let his friend recognize the protagonist immediately. Then Rudd says goodbye, wishing him the best of luck. Go with God, Rudd. We'll always remember you as the protagonist's first friend/mentor/father figure. As soon as Rudd leaves, the protagonist says everything's going perfectly. He defeated the witches early, got a class. This was an amazing start. At this pace, maybe a happy ending isn't so far off. Then he remembers Akila's words while staring at Rudd's hunter insignia. Don't you want to see the end? Maybe it really exists. A clue to the true ending. The protagonist opens the logout menu, but just before pressing the button, he pauses and says yes. He never knows when he's going to die, and that's the thrill of this life or death game. He says he'll make the most of this tension and tells Aquila to wait for him, because he swears he'll reach the true ending. With that, the protagonist completes the hidden quest, the Hunter's Trial, and a new quest is updated. Join the Mercenary Guild. We then see Aquila sitting, watching the protagonist play from that otherworldly planet they were on earlier. She's laughing at the way he dodged the witches, and says she's glad she kept an eye on him. Then, another being, surrounded by a golden aura, asks Aquila if that's him, saying he really doesn't seem like an ordinary guy. Aquila teases her, asking if she's into him or something. Then the being introduces herself, Valfurga, who looks like an angel. Valfurga tells Aquila she's a goddess, so there's no reason she should be watching a human she's supposed to protect in that kind of way. Aquila asks why not, he's so cute. Aquila, wanting the protagonist, confirmed. She comments on how Valfurga is always so cold, saying she used to be more fun before. Valfurga replies that that was a long time ago, and asks if Aquila ever actually paid off his debt. Aquila says it was settled ages ago. Then Valfurga asks if that poor fool even knows whether his debt was paid off, or if he's still working to clear it. Aquila says he doesn't. Valfurga calls her cruel. Aquila says it's fun seeing him so full of life. Even so, Valfurga calls her awful, and Aquila thanks her. Valfurga then asks if he's part of Aquila's plan or just a toy. Aquila says he's more of a promising talent, and tells her to keep an eye on him. Back to our protagonist, who's complaining about his sore legs, wondering how this forest can be so exhausting. He says that only with this body could he get out of there in just 12 hours. Then he finally decides it's time to go to the Mercenary Guild. Upon arriving at a tavern, two beautiful waitresses greet him at Francois Tavern, asking how they can help. The protagonist, looking like a clueless dork, says he's just looking for someone. One of the waitresses says she understands and offers to show him to a table. The protagonist comments that, as expected, this tavern is the classic spot for info, drinks, lively people, and of course, the smell of amazing food. So, if there's a place to get info about the Mercenary Guild, this is it, since people always talk too much when they're happy. But above all, the waitresses are super cute. Then, to totally ruin the tavern's vibe, he asks if they know someone named Rebes Chaltz. Everyone freezes. The blonde waitress clinging to his arm says that names shouldn't be spoken in this place. The protagonist, confused, asks why. The other waitress says he's too dangerous and tells a story about how her boyfriend once got involved with him and came back looking like a mummy. The protagonist's face in this scene is hilarious. She explains that everyone else who dealt with him suffered terribly. The protagonist has single-handedly drained the tavern's happiness. We then see a bunch of young people who now look like elders. The protagonist starts wondering just who the hell Rudd sent him to. Then the blonde pushes him and tells him to run because Chaltz could show up any moment. And at that exact moment, he literally bumps into Rebes Chaltz, who glares and asks who shoved him. The guy is a brick wall. When Rebes looks at the protagonist, he sees Rudd's insignia with him, so he figures this must be the guy Rudd said would come looking for him. Rebes thinks it's perfect. He'd been looking for a work partner, if you catch the drift. The protagonist asks what exactly he means by that, and immediately thinks Rudd is a bastard and that he's dead next time they meet. Walking through the street, the protagonist asks if this means he's now Rebes' new new companion, to be taken into the war between the Elector Prince and the forces of Pesamut. Rebes says he catches on quick and even calls him a smart kid. The protagonist tells us that, even though it feels very much like he's being trafficked into the army of some country, he sees it as a great opportunity. The Elector Prince is one of the game's guardians, one of the 10 electors of Pulse. Through him, he might get info on the other guardians. And, speaking of which, Rebes says the prince is coming. Then Rebes grabs the protagonist's shoulder so hard the system notifies him that he was ambushed and lost 30 HP. Everyone around starts whispering, "It's the Elector Prince's procession." Rebes looks at the prince's group and says the protagonist would fit right in. The protagonist realizes it's different from what he expected, since before, he was always on the other side of things. He sees the new Elector Prince, a blonde guy the protagonist says looks more like a villain. Looking closer at the prince's group, he notices someone very important is there, Lady Valpurgis. The prince turns to Valpurgis and asks if something feels off since she looks distracted. She lowers her head and says no. Then the prince says war awaits, and they move forward. The protagonist tells us that Valpurgis was his companion in previous playthroughs, but, unfortunately, he never managed to save her. It always ended the same way. Then Rebes asks if something's bothering him, since he looks pissed, and the protagonist says no. But to himself, he swears that this time, even if he has to risk his life, he'll find a route where she lives. At the training grounds of Rebes' mercenary guild, the protagonist thinks the place is super intense, reminds him of the Navy. Rebes says it's the perfect time, since they're picking group leaders through duels, and there's money on the line too. The protagonist thinks, fame and cash, not bad, but tells us all he really needs is to contact the Elector Prince. So he tells Rebes he'll sit this one out for now. But Rebes says there's no way Rudd would send him a slacker. Of course he's going to join. The protagonist starts questioning his own agency, but sometimes life doesn't give you that. Rebes then asks if anyone wants to take on the new bee. A bunch of people get excited at the sight of fresh meat. Everyone wants to go first. The protagonist thinks he's gonna have to show a little strength. In a 1v1 situation, Max steps up and introduces himself, saying it's a pleasure to meet him. He asks if the protagonist has some kind of physical issue because it looks like a sword strike would split him in half. Rebes asks if they're ready, and then the duel begins. Max charges, but in the blink of an eye, the protagonist disarms and knocks him out. The system announces the protagonist gained 15 fame points for defeating Max. Everyone is in shock. Max got taken down with just one hit. The protagonist tells us that it was expected. He had eaten red pitayas. Now, his strength was on ogre level. Now everyone wants to know what just happened and asks him to fight them too. After several fights, techniques, and farming fame points, a new mercenary steps up. This one's actually strong. The protagonist sees him as a wall, a massive, muscular guy named Charlotte, who asks how they could lose to a newbie. He says he'll be his opponent this time. Desperate, the protagonist tries to log out, but he can't, thanks, Aquila. He asks Charlotte for a minute to rest, but forgiveness is for God, not Charlotte. With no choice, the protagonist decides to take it seriously. With precise movement, he throws Charlotte into the air and lands a judo slam that knocks him out cold. He earns 30 more fame points, and everyone is blown away that he even managed to defeat Charlotte. Now everyone wants to challenge him even more. Rebes, watching it all, tells everyone to back off. With a sinister aura, he approaches the protagonist, who really wants to believe he's just being protective as Rudd's friend. Then Rebes grins and says the protagonist is the chosen one. He's been chosen to lead the mercenary group into the coming battle. And so, our protagonist departs, now the leader of a mercenary unit. The quest, "Join the Mercenary Guild," is completed, and a new quest appears, "Reclaim Mount Harfian." It's shown that in Savior of Humanity, Charlotte's younger sister, Baptiste, is currently the manager of the Francois Tavern. And also, that in the city where the protagonist is, Frankfurt, the Elector Prince is currently engaged in a battle with Pesamut at Mount Harfian, the very same mountain the protagonist has been sent to reclaim. With all troops gathered near Mount Harfian, Rebes commands the attack to begin. And so, the war against, apparently, orc forces begins in full force. The protagonist, cutting down monsters left and right, says that finally, they're aligned with the Elector Prince's army. It shows Rebes explaining to everyone that they are in direct conflict with the orc army of the demon king Pesamut. So, their mission was pretty simple: steal the military banner of the enemy commander. The plan was that when their forces broke through the enemy formation, they would pass through an opening that would form and collapse the enemy lines. But Rebes stresses that everyone should remember they'd be fighting proud orcs, not only strong, but also highly coordinated. Then, he finally turns to the protagonist and tells him that his job as group leader would be dangerous. Of course, the protagonist gets nervous about his leader role, since he was just trying to get a bit of military merit and get the hell out. His problem is thinking he's the only clever one. It cuts to the orcs, with one of them telling his captain that he brings bad news. Their spearmen are being shredded. The captain says that's ridiculous, because they have elite spearmen, then grabs the spyglass from the guy's hand. And when he sees the protagonist's team advancing, he goes quiet and orders the warriors to form ranks and align the muskets. They start blasting the protagonist's group. The protagonist thinks it's ridiculous. Since those muskets aren't rapid fire, they'd need to alternate between rows to shoot. Quickly, the protagonist's team takes out the orc musketeers, leaving only the captain holding the banner, who says it's impossible that all his men were wiped out by that weakling, aka the protagonist. The orc says they can't be humans, and that he won't allow them to take the banner, because it carries the entire pride and history of their tribe. After all that talk, the protagonist defeats the orc captain and gets the banner, finishing the mission and earning leadership and fame points. With that done, he says he just has to hold out a bit longer, and he'll soon have the military merit. One of his team members comes with bad news. Their allies are retreating, which means they're now completely alone against the orc front line. And the orc reinforcements had just arrived. The protagonist can't understand why everyone else is retreating when victory was right there. The guy nervously asks if maybe they should just leave the banner and run too, but unfortunately, they were already completely surrounded. Then the hidden boss, Great Orc General Cow Lion, appears and says they're done for, asking the brave human warriors to surrender and retreat, still giving them a chance to walk away alive. He says those were proud elite soldiers, and if they turned back now and gave up the banner, he'd honor their courage and spare their lives. But the protagonist, acting crazy, says there's no way he's falling for that lie and tells Cow Lion that if he takes even one step closer, he'll shove their precious banner in Charlotte's underwear drawer, R.I.P. tribal pride. The orc is shocked. How dare he say he'll put the military banner of the orcs in such an obscene place? The protagonist asks if he thinks war has rules, trying to intimidate Cow Lion. If victory meant doing that, he'd do whatever he wanted with the banner. The general then orders the troops to load the big guns, not literally. They start pounding on the protagonist's group. He says that, in his past playthroughs, the orcs never let go of their banner easily. So now, everyone in his group starts getting wrecked. He thinks it's unfair they brought out the general right away, and says there's no way he can beat that monster with his current fame and stats. He panics, wondering what to do, remembering all his friends and the phrase Aquila told him: if he dies in the game, he dies in real life. After a mini-anxiety attack, one of his soldiers tells him to give orders fast or they'll be wiped out. The protagonist agrees and suddenly starts laughing like a madman. Everyone thinks he's lost it. He then shouts for Charlotte to pass him the trumpet. Charlotte says there's no reinforcements nearby for that, but the protagonist tells him to shut up and trust him. He blows the trumpet toward the orcs. One soldier tells him he's pointing it in the wrong direction, away from their allies. The protagonist says he knows and tells him to shut up and block the arrows. In his mind, he says, "We're here, Aquila. If you have any sense, you won't abandon me now." He thinks, after all, he is a VIP. The general shouts for the spearmen to charge, and just as one is about to finish off the protagonist, a spear pierces him. Then, the Elector's royal guard arrives, flying in on horseback, don't ask how, and orders their soldiers to raise their swords. After the scene ends, it shows a fun fact. The orc army's military banner has never been replaced since the army's founding, so it represents their entire history. The names inscribed on it prove how proud their warriors truly are. With the knight's arrival, the orc general tells everyone to retreat, as this fight is now between him and her, the Countess of Niederbayern, a noble duel. He tells her she's a true warrior, and he's an orc. She lunges at his head with a thrust, which he narrowly dodges, and a frenzied cinematic sword fight begins. The protagonist thinks it's amazing how even they are in strength. Even though Valpurgis is still early in the story, she was already very powerful. As she deflects the general's sword, she kicks him in the face, and he laughs, saying that, as expected, she's incredible, not just good with a blade, but also in hand-to-hand combat. He deduces she's probably from the Valfurga Sisterhood, and says a military order like that makes sense. She points her sword at him, and says she serves God with a devoted heart. The orc asks if that's all she has to say. She replies that it's getting late, and charges again. Their swords clash, and in an attack where the general strikes the ground, she suddenly leaps high into the air and, with a single blow, pierces the captain. His last words, "It was a great battle." One of the orcs shouts that the captain has fallen and orders a full retreat. The protagonist is in disbelief. Even though the general was strong, he was defeated with a single strike. But then he says, "That's exactly what you'd expect from Countess Valpurgis." Valpurgis asks the protagonist if he's the leader of the mercenaries. She says she can feel his courage and extends her hand, introducing herself as Valpurgis. He thanks her for saving his squad and shakes her hand. The system notifies that Valpurgis expresses respect for him. He tells her that if she hadn't shown up just in time, they'd all be dead, especially him. He says that, at the moment, he's not the elector, so he should have been more cautious, bowing his head. One of his soldiers asks why he's bowing and tells him to hold the orc banner high. The system notifies that his fame among the mercenaries has increased. The protagonist wonders if all that was really because of him. Then he remembers all the moments from the war and says he understands now, and celebrates the fact that the banner is his. Later, at a restaurant with everyone, Charlotte's sister bursts in yelling his name. Charlotte is cutely eating his little steak, and the protagonist is in the background. The tiny sister asks if he's okay and if he has any injuries after returning from the war. He says he's totally fine. The protagonist asks Redis who she is, if she might be his daughter. Redis says that's impossible, since Charlotte is only 15 years old, 15 years of prison, maybe. Redis says the girl talking to Charlotte is his younger sister, Baptiste. She starts yelling at the protagonist, saying it's his fault Charlotte ended up that way, and demands he pays Charlotte's medical bills. The protagonist even gets the confused status from all that. Charlotte tries to calm her down, but she just turns to him and tells him to shut up while she handles things. Charlotte tells her that it was thanks to the protagonist that they were all able to come back alive. Everyone starts chiming in, saying it's true. If it weren't for the leader, aka the protagonist, they would have ended up orc food. Feeling bashful from the praise, the The protagonist tells everyone to just get back to eating. The whole group starts cheering and thanking him just as Valpurgis suddenly walks into the restaurant. The scene cuts to the Harfium forward base, where Valpurgis says the Elector has summoned the protagonist for a meeting. She says it seems he plans to reward him with military honors. Valpurgis asks if he doesn't think it's amazing. As a mercenary, this is the kind of moment you live for. He thinks this Valpurgis feels different from the ones he's met before. This one seems a bit more cheerful. He teases her, saying the Countess, meaning her, seems happier than he is about the news. She tells him to just call her Valpurgis, not Countess. He corrects himself and says, Valpurgis. Then, riding with her on her horse, she tells him to look around. She points to his soldiers and says that if not for his courage, those soldiers wouldn't be alive. She says they all owe their lives to the protagonist. They are all citizens of the Empire, so by saving them, he saved a part of the Empire too. She asks if he really needs any other reason to feel happy. What a kind woman, honestly. He thinks she's right, and that she's never changed. He remembers all his previous playthroughs, and says the only thing different this time is the nature of their relationship. In all the other scenarios where they met, this time, he's just a mercenary. Arriving at the Elector's war tent, Valpurgis announces she's brought Valersted. The Elector says she's done a good job. Sitting at a table mid-war briefing, he says it's a pleasure to meet the protagonist and introduces himself as the Elector of Steel, Philip. All right then. The protagonist bows and says it's an honor to be in his presence, Your Highness. Then he tells us that this was the famous new protector, and just his presence alone was overwhelmingly strong. The Elector laughs and says, Valor, the great lawnmower. Your courage truly impressed me. You fought like a lion. The protagonist replies that he's honored. The Elector says that's not all. Those who earn military honors should be rewarded accordingly. For the protagonist's company, he grants 100 florins. And for the protagonist specifically, he grants 300 florins. So the protagonist now has 350 florins. And if you're asking how much that's worth, every 100 florins is the annual salary of a spearman. If you're asking what a spearman's yearly salary would be in real life, obviously, I don't know, you booze hound. The protagonist kneels and says he will repay the grace the Elector has shown him. Then the Elector asks if he has any other requests. The protagonist says he has only one. He would like to regroup with his comrades and rest in Weidenbayer. The Elector says that Weidenbayer is relatively far from the front lines, but he will honor the request. He tells him to take a supply cart and use it as needed. The protagonist thanks him again. The Elector asks once more if there's anything else he'd like. The protagonist tells us that usually he'd step back at this point, but instead he asks, Your Grace, may I ask you something? The Elector, brimming with presents, tells him to go ahead. So the protagonist asks what the Elector thinks about the war. The protagonist thinks it's just as expected. Everyone is lost when it comes to this war. He says that there's no avoiding it. He's just a humble mercenary. After hearing the question, the Elector flips it back and asks what the protagonist thinks. The protagonist replies that with his limited perspective, he still can't see the whole picture, but even so, there's one thing that bothers him. A noble laughs at his face and asks what kind of nonsense could possibly bother him. He tells him not to think he's qualified to give the Elector advice just because he earned military merit. Another noble agrees, saying the guy must have picked up some gossip somewhere. But then Valpurgis steps in and says there's a saying, Even when crossing a stone bridge, you should tap it first. She asks the Elector why not hear him out at least once. Then, another noble, an even uglier one, points his finger at her and says, How dare a humble countess speak like that? The man she's addressing is the Elector. The guy warns her to stop spouting nonsense, calling her the niece of the Elector of Bayern, and tells her to show some respect. Not that she couldn't wipe the whole tent with one sword swing if she wanted to. The protagonist thinks that was expected of Valpurgis. Not even the Elector of Steel could simply ignore her. The prince then asks the protagonist to say how he sees this war. The protagonist says there's an ambush coming. The prince is surprised by the information and says that if he's talking about an ambush, he imagines the protagonist has some basis for that. He says yes and explains that the demon king Pezimut's main strategies always involved ambushes and betrayals. He mentions that, considering the war with the kingdom of Toa 10 years ago and the battle with Margrave Anhalt 6 years ago, they can deduce that in both battles, Pezimut's ambush tactics played a decisive role. That said, they shouldn't ignore his other strategy, betrayal. Then the prince deduces that the protagonist is suggesting there's a traitor among them at this very moment. I've heard that in a game before. The protagonist, not wanting to bet everything, says he's only talking about a possibility, since it never hurts to be cautious. The prince, with that psychopathic look, says, "Yes, caution. You're quite bold, aren't you?" He tells the protagonist to listen carefully. The only reason his head is still on his shoulders is because he allows it, and asks if he understands his place. Valpurgis even tries to speak, but the protagonist bows his head and says he understands. Then he gets up, apologizes for crossing the line, excuses himself, and leaves. The protagonist tells us that he's suspicious. In previous attempts, the Elector of Steel had been more prudent, but this time, he seemed extremely arrogant, extremely psychopathic, even. He starts to notice that something is definitely different this time. First, the red dragon berries, the ones Rudd stole from the witches. The protagonist explains that normally, they appear much later. And then Valpurgis, who shouldn't have shown up in the war yet. Everything is different from his many previous playthroughs. Then suddenly, someone calls the protagonist. It's the lovely Valpurgis, who ran after him. In a very cute moment, she says she finally found him again. The protagonist asks if she ran all the way just because she was worried about him. She says yes. The protagonist finds her very cute. Valpurgis says she wants to apologize on behalf of the Elector of Steel, Philip, for his words and actions. And if there's anything else the protagonist wants, she'll make it happen, girl. Don't say that near this guy. And since this protagonist is shameless, he immediately thinks, "Anything I want?" He asks her, "Really? Anything I want? Are you sure? What if I ask for something extraordinary?" She says not to underestimate her. She tells him her family is one of the richest in the empire, rich girl vibes. He says money sounds good. Then he says she must have a lot of clothes. What a scoundrel, truly. Back to being a normal human being, he says he'd like a horse and a pistol, if that's okay with her. She asks if that's really all he wants and says this is a rare opportunity. The protagonist says it's fine. Becoming a knight was always his dream, so he wants to take this chance to learn how to ride. And the pistol, well, that's just a personal fantasy. He starts to tear up. She asks, "What are those tears?" He replies, "The tears of a man." She laughs and says she's never met someone so humble before, if only she knew. In the protagonist's mind, he says he had to give up a lot for this Valpurgis. Then Valpurgis says, "All right, we shouldn't just stand here." She takes the protagonist's hand and tells him to come with her. He's completely enchanted by her. But a little while later, we're shown the battlefield of Hartheim Hill. Elector of Steel, Philip, versus Demon King Pezimut. The prince shouts to Pezimut that now is the time he'll fall. Pezimut, being the Chad that he is, asks if no one's going to shut the guy up. His breath stinks from here. He's a prince and doesn't brush his teeth. Gross. Then a servant tells Pezimut that all preparations are complete. Pezimut says, "Good job." Another servant asks if he really intends to use that maniac Hijaz. Pezimut says he doesn't want to go into that again, but the servant insists that it's too cruel. He adds that capturing the elector could be key. Alive, he's a valuable hostage. Then he asks if it's really worth trusting that monster. Pezimut says he knows, and that he'll keep Hijaz under control. The others just need to trust their boss. Then he calls the voice of evil. A demoness responds and says she's ready. Riding atop other demons, Pezimut tells her she's doing a good job and to stay alert. She agrees. Then he tells her not to go overboard this time. She claims she never does. He yells at her that she always goes overboard. She says that's a lie. She always holds back. Always. He just tells her again not to go too far, and she yells at him, annoyed. One more interesting game fact. The exact conditions to unlock the true ending are still a secret, as the developers never officially revealed them. However, many players believe the Guardians are the key to unlocking the real ending. Back to our protagonist, now riding a horse through the forest, he thinks the horse is amazing. The horse is named Philly, and he says its speed is unreal. He mentions that Philly is just a backup horse, imagine the main ones. He says it's what you'd expect from the noble cavalry of Bavaria. Not only that, she also gave him some insanely expensive potions, healing potions that can cure any disease or wound. One of them costs 1,000 florins. The protagonist says one of her little potions costs as much as an entire building. Rich girl strikes again. Then an explosion happens behind him. He says the war has started, and he needs to hurry, because that arrogant Elector Prince has no chance of winning against Pezimut. He says the guy will probably just charge straight at Pezimut, completely unprepared, and get destroyed. And lo and behold, it happens exactly like that. Prince Philip is betrayed by another noble in his group, who tells Philip to listen carefully. Right now, he's committing treason against the emperor, and he and Pezimut are working together. So the two of them will be arrested for high treason against the emperor. Basically, he's saying he'll make it look like Philip was working with Pezimut all along, framing him on purpose. The prince, on his knees, says it's impossible for anyone to believe this. Pezimut steps on his face and asks if he's still 12 years old. He tells the prince to stop living in an illusion and to look at what's happening right in front of him, adding that he's just a madman with power. Pezimut then snaps his fingers and calls his servants to seize the prince. The prince, looking like a beggar, says they shouldn't touch him because he's a noble elector, real noble behavior here. When Pezimut orders him gagged for being too noisy, the great Valpurgis, our goat, shows up and kicks him in the face. She tells a soldier this is their chance to rescue the prince, so the soldiers manage to grab him and flee on horseback. The traitorous noble yells at Pezimut, saying that at this rate, the prince will escape. Pezimut tells him to shut up because he's already giving him a headache, then contacts Hijaz and says the prince is heading in her direction. Hijaz responds, asking if it's time now since she was having a bit of fun at the moment. Pezimut tells her to get ready and start the operation. She replies, "Yes, my lord," and says it's time for her doggies to eat since they seemed hungry. She's about to unleash her 5 Rottweilers. The protagonist, also in the forest, encounters Hijaz's dogs, zombie-like creatures. She wears down her enemies with them and finishes them off slowly, a tactic the protagonist finds disgusting. She doesn't like to fight fair. Dodging one of the dogs and shooting it, he yells that he knows her game. Seeing that only one dog is after him, he figures the others must be heading toward Philip. But he doesn't care about the prince. He's worried about Valpurgis, he says. So he speeds up his horse to get there faster. Meanwhile, in Valpurgis' group with the prince, he mentions his mana isn't circulating properly. He suspects it's due to Pezimut's power. Distracted by this, a soldier warns of an enemy above them, It's one of the ravenous dogs. Valpurgis quickly decapitates it, then asks the prince if he's okay. He says he is. Then she informs the troops that this area is still unexplored by humans, so they need to be very careful from now on. But suddenly, a soldier lets out a faint cry for help. When the prince looks back, 4 dogs are attacking her, one already latched onto her neck. Valpurgis tells her to hold on, that she's almost there. Then the damn prince yells for Valpurgis to just leave her behind. Valpurgis yells back, asking how he could say that. He replies that it's obvious. The value of that soldier's life doesn't compare to his. That's when Valpurgis realizes no one truly cares about her. She wonders if this is really what it means to be a ruler. She now realizes she should have listened to the protagonist's words before. If only she had truly heard him out, maybe they could have handled all this. This was all the fault of the royal family for ignoring him. Hijaz arrives, laughing, saying humans are hilarious. She manages to loop a rope around Valpurgis's neck, yanking her off the horse. On the ground, Valpurgis watches the prince abandon her and keep riding. This scumbag prince really thinks he can survive alone in this forest. Lying on the ground, Valpurgis says she was wrong about him, thinking someone like him is called an elector. Hijaz hears this and replies that's exactly why he is an elector. So yes, my friends, this bastard was a traitor too, which was kind of obvious. Valpurgis screams at them to bring him back to his senses. She shouts that, for generations, the position of elector holds the right to choose the next emperor of the empire. Being an elector is essentially being an emperor within their territory. That's not a position that should be taken so easily. Hijaz ignores her and asks her soldiers if they're still tracking Philip. They say yes. Hijaz then says, thinking out loud, that Valpurgis also has elector blood, then asks if that's gotten to her. Clearly affected, Valpurgis charges at Hijaz with a punch. Hijaz dodges and whips her across the back. She starts laughing, saying Valpurgis let out a lovely scream. She yells that she wants more, that she wants to hear more of that scream, and starts whipping Valpurgis repeatedly. Despite the lashes, Valpurgis thinks that if it's the protagonist, he'll definitely find a way to fix all of this. But sadly, that was as far as she could go. Hijaz, acting like a complete psychopath, notices a dog corpse on the ground. As she turns around, there he is, the great protagonist, landing a massive punch straight into her face. Equal rights, equal lefts. Hijaz is sent flying, and Valpurgis, crying, sees the protagonist standing before her. Before she faints, she calls him a true hero. So adorable, damn it. The protagonist picks Valpurgis up in his arms. Meanwhile, he just gets up and realizes he managed to kill one of her zombie dogs and sneak up on her without her noticing. She says it's obvious now. He's no ordinary man. The protagonist, holding his brand new pistol, asks if Hijaz is still crazy in the head. She calls him brother and asks if he already knew her. Charging up his aura, he points the gun at her and tells her not to call him brother with that disgusting face. She laughs and asks if he's really going to use a gun. Sure, its range beats her whip, but she warns him he better have good aim. Her whip moves faster than a bullet. Then, they start fighting. The protagonist tries to shoot her in the head, but she dodges, wraps her whip around his neck, pulls him in, headbutts him, then punches him and sends him flying. She screams that this is far from over. The protagonist gets up like it was nothing and starts dodging all her whip strikes as he rushes toward her. She says it's useless for him to try getting closer, but the closer he gets, the more nervous she becomes. She says that even in her own battalion unit, her whip fighting style was top class. Even so, he kept dodging everything and closing the distance. She asks if he thinks she's going to go easy on him. Taking a feint from the protagonist, she attacks him head-on. Before she realizes it, she gets dodged so hard her legs practically give out, and with a stab, he slices her eye. He then asks how that felt. Was it thrilling for her? Take that, you piece of crap. The protagonist says that, after all, he's a melee hunter, not ranged. She panics, saying she was distracted and that's why she lost one of her eyes. She thinks about fleeing to get time to recover. Since she's not good at one-on-ones, she spreads her wings and apologizes, saying she has a tight schedule. She chickened out of the 1v1. The protagonist taunts her, saying she got cold feet. She replies that provocation won't work, because she doesn't fight battles she knows she'll lose. He taunts her again, asking why she's flying then, since today he's a ranged hunter. She laughs in his face, saying she can dodge that bullet from the air. But as she stares at him, her vision blurs and, in the blink of an eye, the protagonist lands a shot right in her gut. He says that shooting a bat with a gun is always satisfying, as it should be. He approaches her, lying on the ground, trembling in pain, and says she's extremely annoying. Then he says he wants to see what kind of loot she's going to drop for him. In a final, dishonorable attempt, she tries to seduce the protagonist, making a cute face and asking if he's really going to kill her. To my surprise, your surprise, and her surprise, he flips her off and tells her to die quietly. Then the notification pops up along with her final scream. You defeated Lieutenant of Pezamut. Loot obtained. 1 magical binding rope, physical enhancement potion, a venomous potion from the poison dragon of Hergama, an antidote to the Hergama venom, and 2,000 florins. The protagonist, getting all of that, says it's basically everything he needed and that he has to hurry before it's too late. He pulls out the healing potion he got from Valpurgis, and as he's about to drink it, he sees her on the ground and promises to save her. Fun fact about Hijaz whip technique, it's so refined that unless Pezamut uses necromancy, Hijaz can fight him evenly. The reason the protagonist managed to dodge everything was due to his instinctive physical skill and vast experience from having played the game countless times. The protagonist reads the potion's description again. It says it completely heals any injury or illness, but it must be applied directly to the injured area, which, luckily, means he'll have to take off Valpurgis' armor. Now things are getting interesting. Seeing Valpurgis unconscious on the ground, he tells himself to stay calm, because this is purely a medical procedure, no room for impure thoughts. Then he begins, ready or not. The protagonist tells us that his real name, which most people, including you and me, probably forgot, is Han Jae-woo, and that when he was a child, his father died from illness and his mother collapsed from overworking. At 18, he was left alone. A scene is shown of him confronting someone who owed money to the guy Han worked for. At that time, he was 22 years old. The man he helped collect from gives him some money as a reward. Han says that was just a temporary fix, and if he had money to pay him, he should just settle his debt with the other guy. The man, nervous, says he has a mission this week. Once he finishes it, it'll pay around 10 million won. The protagonist asks how he plans to get 10 million won from a single mission. He asks what kind of game he's even playing. Then the guy asks if Han doesn't know about the game. Humanity Guardian. The protagonist tells him to explain the game. He says it's a fire title, hot gameplay, beautiful anime girls, and globally acclaimed character designs. 1 billion people were playing this single-player RPG. He explains that top rankers casually got rare items and sold them for 10 million won. The mission he was going to do today would give him that much. Intrigued, the protagonist asks if that capsule is how people are making serious money. The nerdy guy says yes and asks if Han wants to try it. Han refuses, saying he's busy that day. And right then, his boss texts him, saying the job for today is cancelled, so now he's free. Then the protagonist enters the game for the first time. Immediately, he's amazed by how realistic the modern tech is. The sky looked real to him. Even the streets, the people, everything felt like real life. Walking through the city, he sees a fruit stand and says the fruit looked so real. Impressed, he touches an NPC to see if it's really that lifelike. Bro, seriously? The NPC then asks if he's going to pay for the fruit or not. If he's not buying, he should get lost. The protagonist sees that the in-game currency is florin, and he only has 10 of them. So, he decides to save money for now. But then, he sees a child NPC with his mother looking at the fruits. The child says the apples look tasty. The mom tells him they have to leave. Then the protagonist decides to buy an apple for the child. It costs 1 florin. The kid leaves happily, and the mom thanks him deeply, saying that apple cost an entire day's wage. The protagonist says that reminded him of when he was a child, walking around with his mom through the streets of Seoul. He used to always ask her to buy him a fried chicken drumstick. That's when he realizes this game was truly charming. After that, he says he started playing the game more often. When real life stressed him out, playing the game made him feel better. And so, he played more and more. All the anger he built up in real life, he took it out in the game, hunting monsters, helping NPCs, and after recharging his social battery, he returned to his normal life, aka collecting debts and dodging loan sharks and thugs. But he always came back to the game, exhausted. By that point, 5 years had already passed in the game's world. And in that first playthrough, Valpurgis finally appears, saying, "So you're the one they call Han Jae-woo." She introduces herself, saying her name, and mentions she heard he was quite skilled. Then she asks him if he wants to help with the furious boar in the Havel forest. The protagonist asks what kind of furious boar it was. Then Valpurgis asks if he was scared, but to not look weak, he says he was already thinking about having boar for dinner. Valpurgis then says she hopes his skills are as big as his mouth. Next, it shows Valpurgis praising the protagonist for defeating a large furious boar with just one attack. He says she did absolutely nothing the whole time. Valpurgis says he was very strong, so she couldn't even join the fight. Then she asks if he wants to join her party, sending him a party invitation. The protagonist asks if that wasn't just another way for her to boss him around. She asks if he has chronic trust issues by any chance. He says it's something like that. She laughs and says he's interesting. Valpurgis then says that if he accepts the party, she would recommend him as a knight of the empire. Interested, he accepts the offer. Shortly after, the empire shouts his name to the heavens, showing him and Valpurgis looking at the crowd. She says it's incredible how far he got so quickly, and asks how he feels becoming the Steel Elector. He says it doesn't feel like just his own achievement, because if Lady Valpurgis hadn't talked to him that day, he wouldn't be enjoying this view. Valpurgis says that makes no sense, since these are people he saved. This peace they have is something he created. These people are his. She really knows how to give a motivational speech. Then it shows, in the present, Valpurgis saying he really is amazing. She says she didn't live long but had never met anyone as dedicated as him. She asks if he minds her knowing. He's shown all bruised, apparently after getting beaten by her, maybe, and says he simply loves that world, because that was the place where, for the first time, he felt the sky was beautiful. She laughs at him. He says, aside from his face hurting a bit, he's doing great. She asks why he took off her armor, and he says he had no choice. She says that anyway, she'll soon return to her convent. So he decides to go with her to notify the convent that she's alive and well. She says when she goes back to the convent, she will definitely reward him, because there are many things she's grateful for. The protagonist makes a mischievous face, and says he's looking forward to that. Then Valpurgis calls him a pervert. Cutting the talk short, Valpurgis says that even if she isn't the one giving the reward, the convent will still reward him. He says it all sounds great, but he still prefers something from her. So she offers him another drink. What a great reward. At Valpurgis's convent, she's arguing with Sister Angela about the protagonist. Apparently, even though he's a VIP of the convent, Sister Angela says they have no choice. Currently, her convent is under emergency protocol, so Valorstad Valor is not allowed entry. With that, I'll end this story here. If you enjoy it a lot, as more chapters are released, I'll bring more of it to you.